Brothers and sisters, welcome back to this final session on the discussion of Revelation. And I'm going to call this session the Bible in a nutshell. And you'll find out why. Actually, after you've gone through all these 13 sessions before, you should know why I have called Revelation the Bible in a nutshell. So let's see how we have come to this point. Now, the question is Revelation so self-evident and so self-revealing that any person who reads it in earnest should be able to understand? Well, I guess without having some other ideas being biasing their thoughts, okay? Or is it a very convoluted piece of work? Now, let us start by asking, what is the approach that we have taken in trying to understand Revelation? We started with a very unusual approach, I would say. Unusual in the sense that a lot of scholars would start with the background, would start with the background of the author, and would put Revelation into a certain genre, that is the type of literature. And usually they call it apocalyptics, and then with that they have a certain expectation and so on. For me, I didn't start with any of those. I just started with minimal assumptions. One of the minimal assumptions is the internal hints. If you read Revelation, you find that there are a series of sevens, so that would suggest to you that it's very structured, and no one will dispute that. No one can also dispute that Revelation is of Jesus because it said so. And there are warnings which would give us hints as to how we should interpret Revelation. And I've covered that in the first session. Now, and then we also looked at Revelation's place in the Bible. Because if God has inspired the church fathers to put Revelation at the end of the collection of books that we have finally called the Bible, then maybe there is some truth in Revelation recapping all the salient teachings of the Bible. So that's just common sense. And so we have also come to some understanding that maybe Revelation at the end of God's oracle to us, that it should be speaking to every reader. And that also carries some suggestion for understanding the book of Revelation. And so with that, we've discovered that Revelation is indeed structured, is indeed a very well thought out presentation. And I just want to summarize that as 7 characteristics. And I will go through the 7 characteristics. The first 3 would be more on the interpretation of Revelation and by extension of the Bible, or by implication, the Bible. Now, the 4th point would be very important, and that would be the center of the book of Revelation. And I have insisted that this must be Jesus Christ. This cannot be any other person, okay? This must not be any other thing than Jesus. And finally, the last 3 points would deal with the application of the message of Revelation. Now, so let us start with the first point. The first observation is that Revelation is coherent, that it is logically connected. Now, this has very strong implication. It is logical, it is systematic, and it comes from one author. Now, I've not met anybody who says that Revelation is multi-authored, but my emphasis on this point that it comes from one mind is that this mind has to be logical. He has his audience in mind, and he knows that his audience would be more receptive to his message if he speaks coherently. And so let me use this illustration, which I have, I think, mentioned before, that the Bible can be considered as 66 so-called jigsaw puzzles. And each jigsaw puzzle will have to be pieced together, constructed on its own before we can compare. And so it is incumbent upon us to, first of all, construct the last set of jigsaw puzzle that makes up the Bible, called Revelation. And after we have done that, when the pieces would all fit together, then we can compare it to other books, okay? So that is how we should be reading the Bible. Of course, that is, there is a matter of degree. For example, Proverbs would be on the other extreme, that you may not have to construct the entire structure of Proverbs, because Proverbs would not have a very, how would I say, rigid structure, okay? But Revelation must have a rigid structure. And then Revelation would satisfy humans' quest for answers within limits. Now, why do I say that? Because the human mind would look for answers. Now, let me use this illustration. For the human mind would look for explanation for almost everything. The mind wants to put everything under a big umbrella. And sometimes we say people are superstitious. But what is superstition? Superstition is indeed a very desperate attempt to make sense of the world. Now, if you cannot make sense of the world within what you know, then you would posit something outside the supernatural world. Okay, there are gods, there are spirits moving around. And so we call that superstition. But in superstition, we find a very desperate attempt to make sense of the world. So in reading Revelation, people would like to make sense of the book. And if we find a coherent story, then, of course, it will satisfy our quest for answers. But I say within limits. Why? Because there are no answer as to who created God, as to who created Satan. So those are the limits. God tells you that, well, you don't ask who made me. Okay, I tell you that I created this world, and that is the limit, that is the beginning. But after this beginning, things will make sense for you. When it comes to explaining the evil and the chaos in this world, and the righteousness that people hold on to, okay? Now, and then within this limit, superstition is dispelled. Why? Well, because God tells you that I made this world, okay? Though you cannot understand who made me, but I'm telling you, yeah, don't believe in all those spirits, all those crazy supernatural things. This tree is enchanted because some spirit would live in it. No. God is the maker of all these things. And because the revelation is logical, it's rational. So it dispels all this irrationality, superstition. Now, then revelation is not. Now, here it says what it is not, so remember this heading. Okay, what it is not, revelation is not a string of unconnected episodes to be assembled. A lot of people would fall into this trap in assuming that revelation is just a string of unconnected sayings. But again, I believe that is out of desperation, because they started out hoping to make sense of this book. But in the end, they give up because of what others have told them, and because they have tried a number of times and failed. And if they read commentaries, they are even more confused. Now, okay, so the second point. Revelation uses only natural and biblical symbols. Now, what does that mean? It would be a very democratic book. It would be understandable to anyone who seeks after the meaning of this book. But there is a caution. A lot of people, when they approach the book of Revelation, they would, again, like what I've mentioned, go back to the Old Testament and find a similar saying and say, hey, look at this. Is John not quoting this? But there is one very important point. John has seen the ultimate. What is this ultimate? The ultimate is the final revelation that Jesus has died and resurrected. John has seen this. As such, he has the freedom and he is qualified to reinvest meaning into any symbol. For example, the 4 horses in the first 4 seals. Scholars have been scratching their heads as to how these 4 horses would be taken from the book of Zechariah. But from what we understand, though Zechariah talks about 4 horses, it really does not give us the meaning to Revelation's 4 horses. No. John has indeed reinvested in the symbol this a different meaning. And so we have to give John that freedom to use that symbol. And that symbol, for example, a horse, if it is not taken from the Bible, it will be taken from what people would normally associate with natural symbols. The 4 horses would be 4 work horses, the tools of people. Okay, and there are also very strong hints that symbols are irrelevant. Every scholar will tell you that Revelation 20 cannot rely on anything that we have come across in the Bible, be it Old Testament or New Testament, in order to shed light on its meaning. Now, if that is the case, let me ask a very logical question then. If Revelation 20 cannot be so understood, why do you think the remaining 21 chapters can be understood through understanding Old Testament symbols or other symbols in the Bible? The answer is there's no reason why we should believe that the trumpet or the 4, or any other thing would be tied, invariably tied, inextricably tied to Old Testament symbols. So we should have the freedom to understand within the context what the meaning is. And then finally, Revelation is entirely symbolic. However, I have to be careful in saying that its symbolism does not mean that it is detached from reality. On the contrary, because it's symbolic, everything has a correspondence to reality, the reality on earth. And why do I say this? Because there are people, as you have already seen, that when it comes to difficulties in explaining Revelation, they would go heavenward, okay? They would go to heaven and say, oh, these are heavenly creatures. When things are labeled heavenly creatures, you don't have to, you're off the hook. You don't have to find an explanation. But no, what I'm saying is that despite the symbolic nature of Revelation, every symbol has a down-to-earth reality which prompts us to adoration, action, and so on and so forth. Now, so what Revelation is not? Revelation is a democratic book. It's not an elitist book. You don't have to understand Babylonian culture and understand the Babylonian symbols, Roman symbols, Roman history before you can understand the book. Now, that is amazing, isn't it? Now, the other point that I have made is that it is not a hodgepodge of literal and symbolic description. Because if you read commentaries, you'll find that some scholars will be struggling with different passages as to whether they should be read as symbolic or literal. And again, if there are certain passages in Revelation that has to be interpreted symbolically, there's no reason why John would mix literal interpretation or literal description with symbolic description, assuming that you know how to separate the two. There's really no such thing. Well, if some passages will have to be interpreted symbolically, then it is safe to assume as a first hypothesis that everything is symbolic unless you force otherwise. Now, let me give you an illustration. The rider on the white horse with a sword coming out of his mouth. Now, smiting the nations with the sword. If you think that is literal, then you have to explain to me how this rider on the horse wielding his sword in his mouth would battle modern day weaponry, a nuclear bomb, or what have you, okay, supersonic jet. How would he be fighting? So that has to be, well, everyone would take that as symbolic. So if it is symbolic, then you might as well try everything out as symbolic. So don't try to complicate the issue. Start out with symbolic description first. Now the third thing, and I'm going to spend more time on this part. Revelation retells, foretells, and foretells God's work in creation's history. Now what do I mean by that? Revelation is a theological framework for interpreting the Bible. And I have to emphasize the word theological. It does not deal with history. It's not a historical book. It is not a book of only foretelling. Now, when it retells, the emphasis of retelling is in chapter 4 to chapter 11. Though there are elements of foretelling and foretelling in chapter 4 to 11. Now there we see that God first created all the creatures, the elders and the four living creatures would be praising God. And then we see that there's a need for redemption. And then it goes on to say that God's intention for humans is for them to look after creation. However, it is abused. It is abused because people have corrupted the nature or the intention of God in them, okay? So that would be in the first 4 seals, and thereafter, God continues to work. That becomes the foundation of the trumpets. But here in the seals, we see that God was using people fearing his wrath. And he called the 12 tribes of Israel, which has morphed into the uncountable multitude. And thereafter, God would complete his work. So this is the foundation of everything. God would do all these things, okay? But the foundation is still missing the linchpin. And what is the linchpin? The linchpin is in the 7 trumpets. Because in the 7 seals, despite the fact that the seals are being opened by the Lamb has not taken a very active role. The Lamb would mechanically open each seal, regardless. And however, the central work of the Lamb, that is his death and his resurrection, has not been given. When it comes to the trumpets, we see that God continues to work despite the destructions rained on creation. So the first 4 trumpets will talk about all this destruction without giving an explanation. Explanation is then given in the fact that people have been deceived by Satan and his underlings, those represented by locusts. And then these people do not repent. Yet God does not relent. God does not give up and say, hey, you guys face my wrath. Okay, God was saying, well, hold it, stop the thunders, and now preach another message. And the message is the resurrection of 2 witnesses, which would stand right in the middle of the sabbatical time scale of God, the sabbatical time scale of man. And this witness would be, or these 2 witnesses would be the runner up, or the lead up to the Lord of the Sabbath, to Jesus. And from there on, Jesus has proclaimed his victory. The kingdom of this world has become the kingdom of God and his Christ. And that is the ultimate victory, the seminal ultimate victory. So that is the foundation. This chapters 4 to 11 would retell the entire foundation. Okay, thereafter, it tells you the current situation. The 4th tells the problem that we face. So we see this scorcher policy of Satan. Satan knows that it has been defeated, but Satan does not concede. And as opposed to giving up, Satan knows that it has limited time. It redoubles its effort to destroy. Unfortunately, we see this all the time on different scales. A family member, when he or she faces failure, would bring his entire family to destruction through suicide. We've heard stories of that, okay? On the political scene, we see Hitler having a scorcher policy when he knew that his Nazi scheme has failed. He asked his general to destroy all these occupied territories under the Nazis. Saddam Hussein burned up the oil fields of Kuwait. And even here, there are politicians in democratic countries following the age-old scheme of Satan. Well, we've seen all of this, okay? But the Bible tells us that the saints would follow Jesus. The saints would follow Jesus in concretizing the seminal victory of Jesus. Now that is very clear. So this explains all the struggle. And in fact, because this is a framework in the Bible, you can fit all these things into this foretelling. For example, all this Old Testament prophetic books would be foretelling. They tell people about the current situation and then call them to, well, come out of Babylon in a way. Okay? And so after this foretelling, then there is this foretelling. Foretelling would be concentrated in the last 2 chapters of the Bible, in which the new heaven and new earth would come down. And this progressive and eventual victory over God's opponents would be complete. And I just have to say that all this intertwined. For example, in the seals, which is mainly on retelling, it also talks about God completing his work in the 6th seal, when the Lamb would be leading his people to the springs of water. So that is a foretelling of the end, though that is not the emphasis. Emphasis is on retelling the foundation, but you cannot escape the fact that in retelling the foundation, you have to point to the ultimate future. Again, when it comes to foretelling, well, it also talks about the end of Babylon. While it is analyzing the camps and how they eventually would self-destruct, it also points to the ultimate destruction. So that would also be foretelling, okay? And however, when it comes to the foretelling, it does not have a lot of reference back to the retelling part. Well, actually, there is, and you can actually sort out those elements. But in the main, 21 and 22 would be foretelling. So what Revelation is not? Revelation is not a string of future events, of specific future events. A lot of people would read geopolitics into Revelation. No, Revelation is mainly theological. It is not about geopolitics. And when we discuss chapter 20, we realize that a lot of people have interpreted Revelation as a narration that starts only midway in history. And what is that midway? It starts at or after Jesus has come to this world and maybe has died and resurrected, and everything would happen after his resurrection. Well, it really depends on how you read it. But regardless, whether it starts at the time that Jesus has set foot on this earth or after his resurrection, it is still incomplete because it only has half the history. It is not a complete history. What about all those people before Christ actually walked this earth? But from our understanding, it is not a half story. It is a complete story, the entire story, but a theological story being told. Again, a lot of people would consider Revelation as a divination, as soothsaying, and unfortunately, people would consider Revelation as prophecies, like the prophecies of Nostradamus. Who is Nostradamus? The 16th century, I would say, mystic, astrologer, a physician, and he uttered and has written some prophecies, very nebulous things, talking about things in the future that you can interpret in so many different ways. And it's very unfortunate that people may think that Revelation is a divine version of Nostradamus' prophecies. That cannot be further from the truth. It is a theological framework for interpreting the Bible. And because it's a framework, those minor teachings would not be very important, would not be given in Revelation. For example, how a husband should conduct himself before his wife, before his family. He shouldn't beat up his wife. That's common sense, okay? Those are, I would consider, minor teachings, and it has not made it into the theological framework of the Bible. But from the theological framework of the Bible, those things can be deduced. So keep in mind what Revelation is not. Then, now, this is important. Revelation is centered on Jesus Christ. And Revelation actually is a gospel about the ever-working Lord of the Sabbath, who resurrects in the symbolic center of the history of Revelation. This is very important. Now, editorially, if you take out the Lord of the Sabbath, that is the two witnesses that have resurrected right in the middle of God's sabbatical time scale, human sabbatical time scale in chapter 11. Revelation would disintegrate into incomprehensible fragments, little passages here and there. And unfortunately, people have not seen that. And that is why they have interpreted Revelation in so many different ways. If you look at the structure as proposed by these different people, there are so many different structures, it's so very confusing. But if you put Jesus right in the middle as the center, that straddles the Old Testament and New Testament, that straddles the two eras, then everything in Revelation would make sense. Okay? Now, the good thing is that it gives us a focus. We Christians have been bombarded by so many agendas. We don't know what to follow. But if you say follow Jesus, because we're Christians, follow Jesus. Jesus is the entire focal point of the conclusion of the Bible, then you know who to follow. And I say this also applies to the Old Testament. Now, not only theologically, because, well, of course, theologically, it is true, because Jesus' work would be effective also for people in the Old Testament looking forward to this hope in the Messiah. And that is, I think, the common denominator for those people in the Old Testament looking for God's redemption. But also, in a very practical sense, are there people, Old Testament people, living in this day and age? Yes. There are people who have not heard of the historical Jesus, his death and resurrection, but who still hold on to a hope that God would one day renew his world. God would one day redeem his world. And these are the people still living in the Old Testament. And Jesus' work would still be effective, would still apply to them if they hold fast to this hope. So it is the center, it is the focus for everybody who has this hope, whether they be in the Old Testament or the New Testament. And all God's promises in the Old Testament have been fulfilled. there is a lot of controversy on this, but I'll explain this a little later. And then, this is a very subversive theology. Suppose if people give you an ideology, it is only subversive to a certain extent because it is not pegged to one living person. But if this theology is not pegged to some nebulous God, some future hope, like communism, like, well, I don't know about capitalism, but all the isms, okay? If it is not pegged to one living person and that person continues to live, it will gradually lose its power after the person passed away. But if it is pegged to a person that you can relate to, then it becomes powerful. And because it continues to exert its power, it is subversive. And that is why governments who try to ban Christianity when Christians speak out and speak up against the unrighteous political moves. Now, so what it is not, what Revelation is not a frivolous, some frivolous, miraculous science, okay? It teaches basic theology. Now, it is not a further fulfillment of as yet to come prophecies. There is nothing more to come, okay? Everything has been fulfilled in Jesus. For example, there are people who are still telling you that there are Old Testament promises of God. For example, the rebuilding of the temple, it has not been rebuilt, so it has to be rebuilt. But no, all those things have pointed to Jesus and are fulfilled in Jesus. I cannot go into that. But there are Zionist people, Zionist Christians, who look to those so-called unfulfilled according to them, okay, unfulfilled prophecies, without realizing that those have already been fulfilled in Jesus. All of them have been fulfilled in Jesus. And some Zionists would go as far as saying that Jews, now actually the term Jews is extremely nebulous because who is a Jew? There are different definitions, but let's lay that aside. They say that Jews are saved or can be saved, not through Jesus, but through obedience to Old Testament laws. They go to that extreme, but no, everything is focused on Jesus as far as the end of the Bible, the conclusion of the Bible is concerned, and as far as God's revelation is concerned. So everything is focused on Jesus. Take that to heart. Now, it is for every person in every generation. It is an everlasting, unchanging, and adaptable treatise. Because what does Revelation start out with? It started out by saying, well, God's creation is good, but somehow it has been messed up. And God restates the everlasting, his foundational commission for man. That is, man will have to look after his created order. Okay, so everybody would be called to the same basic task. And remember in chapter 14, when it comes to the eternal gospel. Now this is the eternal gospel. By eternal, it means from the beginning to the end, it's always true. The first thing is to recognize God as the creator, not as the savior first, as the creator. And then because Babylon has fallen, Babylon has been defeated, so you should come out of Babylon. The first thing is that you are created by God and you have a responsibility towards God and towards his creation. So it has a message for everybody, okay? And so in resisting the forces of evil, regardless of when you live, where you live, incremental progress is being made. And that would be the incremental progress towards actualizing Jesus' victory. So Revelation is for everybody. The gospel is for everybody, provided that we understand the gospel properly. So it's important that we understand that Revelation leaves no speculator untouched. Everybody is included. You're either in God's camp or you're in Satan's camp. A lot of people would try to read Revelation as if they're watching a movie. Hey, isn't this the great times, okay? There will be cataclysmic happenings. This is fun time. I just love to be alive during this exciting time. No. Revelation calls for responsibility, calls for response. And it does not allow for escapism. There is a backstop. Beyond that, you cannot retreat. You have to take responsibility. It's for every person in every generation. Now, here's another thing which a lot of us evangelical Christians would forget. This scope encompasses all of God's creation. What does that mean? It has a cosmic message. The cosmic message is that the saints would be leading God's creation to salvation. That is already quite clear. It is an appropriate end to God's work. Why did I say that? Because the Bible starts with the introduction in Genesis. And in Genesis, we're told that God created. And so God created everything. And it is only appropriate that in the conclusion, this entire scope of the introduction is brought out prominently. And the creator of all, the Alpha, is the Omega, is the perfecter, and is the leader in between. Everything would come under God's leadership. Nothing can be taken out of this cosmic scope. Now, we've seen this. The salvation in the Old Testament Sabbath course, as you have already seen, the day, okay, which is more a cause for a person to be endeared to his own work, and then the cause of human. All this Old Testament cause or causes are now expanded to every aspect of God's creation in the New Testament. And so the scope of this of God's concern would encompass his entire creation. So again, it is important that we recognize what it is, because there are people who would tell you otherwise. And there are so many other different messages that would contradict the message of Revelation, that I have to really bring this out, that what Revelation is not. Revelation is not a message for human salvation or of his spirit only. Now, human salvation is what so-called evangelicals would emphasize, that you have your own relationship with God and God will save you. A even more deviant version is that there is no salvation of the body, despite the fact that Jesus resurrected bodily. Your body will go to ruin. Okay, there will be no bodily resurrection, and salvation is only of your spirit. No, there's no such thing in the conclusion of the Bible. This is not a message only for human salvation. Yes, people are asked to leave Babylon so that the collapse of Babylon will not crush it. But starting with people, God will extend his salvation to the entire creation. And then there is this message on Revelation is not a message on specific ethnic happenings. For example, Israel. For example, Jerusalem. I have already alluded to that. And kings from the east. People would say, hey, the kings from the east would be Arabs. Well, I don't see this, because God is a God who accepts everybody. Whether you're from the east, west, north, south, whether you are Chinese, Arab, Caucasian, or whoever, he would accept everybody through the salvation, through the work of Jesus. So Revelation is not a message on specific ethnic happenings. Okay, I hope the message will get through. So all this talk about Israel is not found in Revelation. Now then, Revelation completes God's message to humankind. And in the very first session, I pointed to a warning in chapter 22. The warning is not to distort God's message, or else very severe consequences would befall you. And so this message is delivered to mankind once and for all. And this is important. God's greatest direct intervention in his creation is through Jesus' death and resurrection. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that there are no more miracles? Well, I would say that miracles is not what we should be looking for. Okay. Jonah in the belly of the fish is the only sign that Jesus would meet. And that sign is sufficient for us Christians. And as such, it is an invitation to apply what has already been accomplished in the Lord of the Sabbath. And this is for the faithful and the brave. Because those who are timid would seek shelter elsewhere, would seek shelters in miraculous signs and all kinds of things. But God is saying, be brave, be faithful, and I will repay you, and I will reward you in Jesus Christ. Okay? Even if God does not bring help. So Revelation is not a program of the future. There's no great tribulation. There's no rapture. There is no millennium. Everything has already been told. And it is important because this is what in theological term is called eschaton. What is this? It is the content of the end age. Most people look at the end age as something in the future. No. According to Revelation and according to the Bible, the end age is already here. Because Jesus has died and resurrected. Okay, that is the content of the end age. The end age will be played out when people live according to the victory in the death and resurrection of Jesus. When they really materialize this victory, then the world would progress according to God's plan, according to God's intention. And it is for the faithful and for the brave. So Revelation is indeed a wonderful book. Now, people would ask, why use symbols? I mean, after going through all these things, if you do not spend an inordinate amount of time on Revelation, you can't make heads and tails out of Revelation. Why can't John simply tell us what is being conveyed by symbols? Just talk plainly. Now, my answer, partial answer, is that symbols are esoteric. For example, when it comes to the players, there are two types of players. The saints. On Jesus' side, the saints following the Lamb. Angels led by Michael. Angels cleansing the earth and so on. And then there are people beheaded, the resurrected. On the beast side would, of course, be the beast. The false prophet and Babylon. Babylon is everywhere. The dragon, ancient serpent. Now, these are not ordinary day-to-day symbols that you can associate with. But when symbols are translated into labels, it becomes a different story. Church is a label. Now, an evil empire is a label. Excess of evil is what politicians would label others, other people that they don't like. And if they go to the extreme, they say, there's a swearing word, okay, some whole nations, okay. These are never used in the book of Revelation. But when it comes to church, I just want to use this word church. You see that church seems to be a very strong emphasis in Revelation, but not in the main letter. You see, there are certain churches being addressed in chapters 2 and 3. And then after the main letter in chapter 22, John and Jesus are speaking to the churches again. But right in the middle, in the main letter, between chapter 4 and chapter 22, verse 5, church, ecclesia, this word is never ever used. Why? Because church is a label. It's not an esoteric symbol. I belong to the Anglican Church, I belong to the Baptist Church, I belong to the Lutheran Church, I belong to the what have you church, Alliance Church, and so on and so forth. And with this label, I'm projecting an air of integrity because I go to church. I'm a dignified person. I'm a good person. It shelters people. But then, when you ask, have you been led by Michael to defeat Satan? You say, oh, okay, I have to go home and think about this. Have you been cleansing God's earth like as an angel? Is your testimony so good that it will leave a legacy for future generations as if you're still speaking after you die? As if you have resurrected. Now, this cannot be sheltered, okay? It exposes mercilessly. And then, not only so, what about the beast? Even if you go to church, are you terrorizing people as a politician? Are you speaking lies? Now, are you oppressing people in your commercial transactions? Are you following the dragon? So symbols would really expose all these things through its description. And that is why symbols are powerful. But let me show you the power of symbol through something which you should already be very familiar with. The two enigmatic witnesses at the heart of Revelation. Now, this slide you haven't seen before. But see, there's two witnesses standing right in the middle. Now, you know the story. You should have known the story if you have attended this course. And so these two witnesses will stand in between two sets of time scales, right? 3.5 days, times and half a time, 1,260 days, 1,260 days, 42 months and 42 months. So when you add the 3.5 days together, that makes a week. When you add the 1,260 days that together, that would make one sabbatical year, and so goes for the 42 months. Okay, so far so good. So you see, this is already a very powerful symbol. Now, 1 week is represent God's work, because that's what Genesis tells us. So if that is the case, God worked from the beginning to the end. Okay, so it extends this work. And so the two witnesses will be working from the beginning to the end. More so, as opposed to seeing God's time scale, we also see human time scale, one sabbatical year. Wow. So we see God and people working. And then, not only so, you see the days are nuanced for what? For the saints, because they walk in the light. And the light comes from the sun, and the sun has governed the day. And what about the 42 months? Well, it's assigned to the night, because of the moon would govern the night, and because sinners would walk in darkness. Now, we have gone through all this, so you should be very familiar with this. But I will just show you this diagram to give you an idea of how wonderful this symbol is. But this is not the end. Look at this. So these two witnesses, when we interpret it according to this sabbatical time scale, would be the Lord of the Sabbath. Now, who is this Lord of the Sabbath? So this brings again Jesus, the flesh and blood Jesus, in the gospel, into the picture. Jesus claims to be Lord of the Sabbath, and Jesus paid his life for his claim. That is very clear in the four Gospels. And then the two witnesses would be the Old Testament lead up to Jesus. And Jesus has fulfilled law and the prophets. Now and then, there's more. Because Jesus is God. He does God's work. So he would be working right through the 7 days. And because Jesus is man, he would be the Son of Man, and he leads the saints throughout history. Now here it already teaches the nature of Jesus. But not only so, he being the Son of Man would judge sinners throughout history. So nobody's left out. Now just think, how many messages are being conveyed through this one symbol? Through this one symbol, well, of course, within the context of all these things. Just count, I've lost count. Just count the number of symbols, the number of messages being conveyed by this one symbol. So this is extraordinary. So this is very, very powerful. So that would bring me to the end of my presentation. And let me ask another question about the inspiration in the Bible. Now, I hope you recognize that the Bible, the book of Revelation is beautiful. It's sublime. It's rational. It appeals to our mind. It's relevant. Okay. It is cosmic in scope. It is final. And the central character is Jesus. After recognizing all these things, I should ask, could revelation come about without God's inspiration? Now, I don't know. Could John be so wise as to bring this about without God's inspiration? If, as I have answered, that it is impossible and the Bible, Revelation is inspired by God, then what about the Bible? This is the last book of the Bible. And then the question is, does understanding Revelation mean knowing the message of the entire Bible? And my answer is yes. Now I just want to say say something a little bit more. When it comes to the inspiration of the Bible, a lot of people would automatically bring up the question of inerrancy of the Bible. I think that is a completely misplaced discussion. Because if you don't understand the Bible, if you don't understand the beauty of the Bible, if you don't appreciate the beauty of Revelation, then how on earth can you talk about inerrancy or errancy? Does the Bible have mistakes? Is it in error? I mean, once you understand it, then you know that the Bible is inspired by God, so that it is enough to prompt us to action. And with that inspiration, our life will be motivated. It's not to debate. It is not, well, our life will not be motivated by all those heated but fruitless debate on the Bible. Okay? Now, so this is really the end. Be patient. So if you're interested to help me sharpen my take of Revelation through discussion, now visit my Facebook, it's here, or you can email me, and I love to hear from you. And God bless.